flying away from us. Are y'all awake? Okay. I was about to say, that makes you all are at least awake, so you can tell me afterwards what I said. There it is. All right. Try to make this, like I said, make this super quick on review and move on. The 4 different views of Revelation. Again, these are important, but I want to remind you that the key word, even though I didn't put it on here, the key word is only on these. Most of the people view these in these 4 different ways as only these time periods. So the preterists are only, the only events written about in Revelation are before AD 70, AD 80 area. The futurists are only think it concerns the end times. So they're kind of the two that are the opposite of each other. So the preterists are only in the past, futurists are only in the future. The continuous historical view basically thinks it's a whole timeline, everything from when John wrote it all the way there. So every major event in human history is covered in Revelation, which I feel like is about one of the hardest ones to deal with, because there's just, Revelation's 22 chapters, but there's a lot of stuff in human history to cover in 22 chapters. Do you think you can write a summary of the entire history of from Jesus onward in 22 pages? Other than saying something silly like people fought, people died, people argued. I could write that in 3 sentences. That's the summary of history. But the idealists don't believe that anything is specific. Anything at all is specific. There's nothing specific in the book. It's only there for general ideas, only there for general principles. And while I agree that the general principles are the most important part, there's some stuff that's pretty obvious, as we'll get to. Some stuff that's pretty obvious that we can identify that is specific in a certain way. So that's important to keep in mind as we keep moving forward. Now, we're not going to go through all of this again, but the author of Revelation identifies himself as John, even though he doesn't call himself John the Apostle, based on the way that the language matches up with John's Gospel and 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, based on the way that there is a close theological similarity between the two books, based on the fact that people who lived close to the time of the writing said that it was John the Apostle. I don't see any reason to question why it would be John the Apostle, same author of John, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. And just as a kind of a reminder, at the beginning of Acts, when Peter and John are in the temple and they heal the crippled man and all that, that's that same John that would have wrote this, okay? So again, you have this connection with this guy. We're pretty familiar with him. And like I said, there does seem to be a few things that might indicate it's a different John, but all of them can be pretty easily explained. All right. Like I said, we're trying to move fast here so that we can really get into this section. We started with this last time, and this is where we're going to spend almost all of our time this morning. And I know we've been in the introductory material almost a month now, but the thing about this study, this is a little bit different than a lot of the other ones I do when I study a book. Once we get through the introductory material, we're going to be able to fly through the text so fast because we've already going to have covered half of it and understand the concepts and the principles that we're going to be using to look at it. We're going to be able to fly through the text, so it's almost going to be 50-50 introductory, 50-50 text, but I promise we're moving pretty quickly. The date of Revelation, one of the things that everybody agrees on is that it was basically during a time of persecution, a state-sponsored persecution. Now the question is, when did this happen? When was there state-sponsored persecutions by the Roman Empire? History tells us of a few different ones. But if we also, the reason why we already talked about it being John, the Apostle John, is then if it is a time of persecution, it would have had to be really close to the Apostle John's life. So that rules out any persecution basically after 100 AD, because at that point John would have been at least 100, if not more, possibly. We don't know his exact age, but we can zoom in and we can say, all right, it's got to be within John's life or really close to John's life. Then we can zoom in even farther. What periods of persecution do history record for us that is during the life of the Apostle John? And there are two time periods, two emperors that do fit this bill. And I think I already mentioned last week, and I'm going to go ahead and just tell you, out of these two, Nero and Domitian, the two emperors, I firmly believe that it's Domitian, but there are a lot of your brothers and sisters in Christ who firmly believe it's Nero. And so this part is kind of up for debate, but this is helpful to understanding the book. One of the main reasons I think it's Domitian, but there's a lot of other reasons, but one of the main reasons is that Irenaeus, who's from Smyrna, he was a writer who lived in Smyrna, which is one of the 7 churches specifically mentioned in Revelation, is quoted as saying that the book was at the close of Domitian's reign. Now, Irenaeus, was taught by Polycarp, who, according to writings that I believe to be fairly accurate, Polycarp was taught by John. So this is basically John's grandson in the faith saying that John wrote this around the time of Domitian's reign. Now, again, could I tell you the entire history of my grandparents this morning? Absolutely not. In fact, I feel ashamed sometimes as to how little I feel like I know about my grandparents' life. I know a lot of the specifics. I know a lot about what they did when I was alive, but a lot of their childhood and stuff I'm a little fuzzy on, and I really want to learn more about that. I spend, when I go to visit them, I will ask them. I'll take the time and I'll try to ask them and learn a few new things about them every time, but I don't know my grandparents' life. I can't tell you everything that happened, and if I was to try this morning, I would probably make mistakes. And so I'll just say, even though Irenaeus wrote this and said it happened during this time, is not a stamp, we're done with this discussion, because it very much could be. It just depends on how well he remembered. And being humans, people tend to forget. So really we're going to examine 3 different types of internal evidence to Revelation that help us to determine which period of persecution the book is discussing. And those 3 are what the nature of persecution is, understanding the nature of persecution of both of those times. The condition of the Ephesus church, as silly as this may sound, this is actually, I think, one of the things you may find the most interesting is the comparison of this, because I think it's helpful in understanding the way congregations work and evolve and the things that can happen to them. And then the succession of kings in Revelation 17, 1 through 14. We'll get to that. We started in last week working through these persecution time periods. The reason why, another big reason why I do not believe it's the Nero persecution is because Nero's persecution, history records, was about mid-64 to mid-68 AD, and it's pretty much confined to the city of Rome itself. Now, even though I don't have maps up, I know you all know the map of the Mediterranean enough in your mind to be able to say, Rome is in Italy, and then that next peninsula over is Greece, and then across the Aegean Sea is Turkey, right? Right on the corner of Turkey is what they would have called Asia. It's not what we refer to as the continent of Asia. They would have referred to that area of Turkey as Asia. So if Nero's persecution is pretty much limited to the city of Rome, why are we writing a letter to the 7 churches of Asia, hundreds of miles away, saying, watch out for this persecution? Again, it's one of the main reasons that I really feel strongly about this. However, no record of persecution during this time period has anything mentioning outside of Rome. However, the records are not complete. They're not complete, and they sometimes have biases, and we're going to talk about why in a minute that might hurt my case for Domitian as well. Because in these records no secular writings. So these are people who are not Christians, which would include a lot of the Roman historians like Pliny and all of these other guys that would have written around this time period. None of the Roman historians explicitly accused Domitian of widespread hostilities against the Christians. So we don't have anything outside of what the later Christians wrote saying Domitian was this bad, evil guy. Primarily, everything we know about Domitian's persecution comes from Christian writings. And I just want you to understand, and I want you to be honest with yourself, if these writings are not inspired, which we do not have any evidence that they are, right? These external biblical writings, we don't have any evidence that they're inspired. I don't see any evidence in there that they're inspired. Do we, as Christians, sometimes have a tendency to exaggerate or to inflate our problems in any way? Do we? Or is it just me? Do I like to make out my life being, oh man, this was so hard, I can't believe I had to go through this. And then you compare it to what other people are going through and you're like, that's not really a big deal. And so there is kind of a trend in these Christian writings a little bit to inflate this Domitian up to basically almost the level of Satan, right? He's the ultimate enemy. He is the arch enemy. We can't believe we had to go through this. This guy was pure evil. And so I don't know for sure, and we will never know for certain whether these writings are accurate or not in the way Domitian persecuted the Christians. However, we do have historical records that say that Domitian was assassinated. We even know the date, on the 18th of September in 96 AD. Generally, well-liked emperors don't get assassinated, okay? If it's somebody that is generally liked by the whole population, there's a very low tendency for them to get assassinated. However, Domitian was. Now, the Senate, which the Roman Senate didn't have a ton of power at the time. It was mostly with the emperors, but they did have some power. The Senate passed what they called in Latin, it's a damnatio memoriae, and they wanted to remove him from all the official accounts. They hated him so much, they hated Domitian so much that they wanted to remove him from every official account. They wanted to remove him as much as possible. And so that would explain, at least to me, that would explain why we don't have any secular writings that tell us that Domitian persecuted the Christians, because they tried to erase everything about the guy. In history, if you didn't like your predecessor, if you didn't like a certain king, it is possible to erase or to manipulate or to change information. What is that famous saying? Have you heard the famous saying, history is written by the historians. Well, technically, history is written by the winners. And if Domitian got assassinated, would he be a winner or a loser? I would say he would be a loser. And so if history is only written by the victors, we don't know exactly what Domitian did, and we don't have the evidence for him. So kind of comparing what little information we have and comparing it with some of the details in Revelation, Nero tends to execute Christians. And again, this is just Christians mostly within the city of Rome. Probably Peter and Paul were executed during Nero's reign in the city of Rome. However, Nero never really banished anybody. Do you remember that we are told in Revelation chapter 1 that John is on the island of Patmos suffering a banishment for the sake of Christ? One of the things that history records that Domitian did was he banished a lot of his enemies instead of killing them. Because politically, that's a lot more middle of the road way of getting rid of people. All right? It's a little more, well, I didn't kill them. I just sent them on a nice extended vacation away from me. We even have record of Domitian banishing his wife. He didn't like his wife anymore, so he sent her off. We don't know what happened to her, but we have record of Domitian banishing his wife. And so John is banished. That fits a lot more with what Domitian did than what Nero did. Now, I'm not going to read every single one of these, but that column on it's your right, that column on the right, they're exterior sources. And again, like I said, there's not very many because they wanted to remove Domitian from the record. They wanted to, that Latin word damnatio should be able to tell you everything you need to know about what they wanted to do to him. But we do have this. Tacitus and Suetonius, who both lived during that time and wrote during that time, they described Domitian's final years as a reign of terror. Clement of Alexandria, who lived after that time, calls him a tyrant. There are records of Pliny the Younger examining those who charged with being Christians in Asia Minor, some of whom recanted their faith 2 decades earlier during Domitian's reign. And then you have Eusebius reports persecutions. Tertullian compares Domitian's cruelty to what Nero had done. And Clement, a contemporary of Domitian, Clement is a Christian writer, but he refers to the sudden and repeated misfortunes and calamities that have befallen us. And so based on what we know of that, I think that the style of persecution that John is going through and describing better fits with Domitian than Nero. But that doesn't mean it doesn't fit Nero. It doesn't mean Nero didn't decide, because the dude is crazy. Nero was insane. And so it doesn't mean he just didn't decide one day to banish one of them. I want to try some new punishment. Let's throw this old man on an island. Totally possible. I want you to understand it's totally possible. I'm just looking at what we have. I feel like I don't really like doing puzzles most of the time, especially, have you ever done those Thomas Kincaid puzzles where it's a painting of a cottage with a hedge and a sunset in the background? I don't know what I'd rather do than do a sunset puzzle. It's 35 different shades of the same orange. It's just like, oh, don't make me do it. I like those puzzles that have like different pictures and words and captions and stuff like that. Those are the ones I like. But what I feel like I'm doing here is do you all do the border of the puzzle first? Is that just me? Okay. Most of you do the border of the puzzle first. I feel like we've got the border of the puzzle and a few key things here. And just because I say that I feel like this better fits Domitian doesn't mean it doesn't fit Nero. I just think I'm looking at what is the way that the puzzle pieces best fit here. And again, there's a lot of convincing brothers and sisters in Christ who would disagree with me on that. But it doesn't, again, this is the fun thing about it. It doesn't change the message. And again, as I keep talking about, even though I do not think we're only in it for the grand spiritual truths, that is the most important part. So as long as we agree on that, that's good enough. All right. Second thing, the condition of the Ephesus church. Now, this is what's really interesting to me. So, Paul wrote 1st and 2nd Timothy to Timothy while Timothy is working in Ephesus. Ephesus is one of the congregations that we have the most written about them, because we have Ephesians, right, which is the epistle to the Ephesians. Then we have Paul talking to Timothy during 1st and 2nd Timothy, telling him about how to help that congregation. And then you have a little blurb about them in chapter 2 of Revelation. They get one of the letters to the 7 churches. So out of all the congregations that we're the most familiar with, Ephesus is one that we have almost the most information about from Scripture. So here's the case that is being made with this line of evidence. If Revelation had been written during Nero's persecution, which was 64 to 68, and prior to the Jewish War, 66 to 70, which is what a lot of people will say, if it's written during Nero's persecution, it's written about that time, all of these different things going on. If it was written during that time, then it would also line up to being written around the same time as 1st and 2nd Timothy. All right? If it was written during Domitian's reign, it was written around the same time as 1st and 2nd Timothy. Are you following me on that? So what this does is what was done was comparing what does Paul say to Timothy about the church in Ephesus versus what does Revelation say about the church in Ephesus? Because this is the same congregation. It doesn't look exactly like this, but it's the same general concept of when you hear the word congregation, same general thing. Paul tells Timothy to charge them not to teach other doctrine. John says you are standing against evil false apostles like the Nicolaitans. So Paul tells Timothy, make sure that they don't teach other doctrines. And then they are commended in Revelation for not teaching them. All right? So they did something good here. But they had to be taught. Make sure that you're not teaching false things. Timothy's there teaching them to do that. And then by the time John gets around to doing it, they're not teaching those things. They are standing for the truth. Right? Do you understand what we're doing here? And if you look, again, this is just a summary of it, but I have scripture references for every single bit of this. If you want to go back and look at it, the easiest thing to do is open up your phone, take a picture of it, go back and look and check everything that's being said here. Paul tells Timothy to tell them, pray for all kings, for kings and all in authority, that we may lead a quiet and peaceable life. Right? You've heard that verse before. 1 Timothy 2, 1 through 12, or 1 through 2. It sounds like they're currently leading a quiet and peaceable life, right? That verse makes it sound like they're currently. But the entire book of Revelation is about the fact that the governing authorities are disrupting our quiet and peaceable life. All right, so that's the entire point of the book of Revelation. The governing authorities are intending on disrupting our life. Paul warns them, perilous times are coming. John says perilous times are here. Paul says, all desiring to live godly in Christ Jesus will be persecuted. Now again, this comes back to the Greek that I do not have knowledge of myself, but the people that I trust on this subject say that persecution, that word will be persecuted, you understand that to mean in the future. Not right now. He doesn't say all desiring to live godly in Christ Jesus are being persecuted. And this lines up in the Greek, this matches in the Greek. It is a future tense, will be persecuted. And again, one of the entire messages of the book of Revelation is persecution is now happening and will get worse. Paul says there will be a time in the future that they will not endure sound teaching. However, John says you are currently resisting false teachings and practices. So that time is not yet there. Now, this is the one that's really interesting to me. The last one. Paul says in 1 Timothy 1, 5 through 6, that only some have turned away from their pure love, from their first true love for Christ. Only some have turned away. And while Ephesus is standing against these false doctrines and all these other things, John tells them at the command of Jesus. Again, most of you, if you open Revelation chapter 2, it's going to be in red because it is Jesus speaking directly. Jesus tells the Ephesus church, you have abandoned your first love. Now, God is inspiring both Paul and John, right? We believe that. We agree with that. So if these books are written around the same time, why are they kind of presenting a little bit of a conflicting message? Is God changing his mind? No. Also, I mean, we're talking about the same time period. Do you think that these changes happen overnight? I don't really think that they happen overnight. I think based on what little experience I have and what experiences that you all have working with churches, whether you've been here most of your life, whether you're newer here, whatever it is, if you have experience being a part of a church, you know that these changes don't just night and day, 1 year. We love God. We are tired of serving God. That doesn't just happen in a year or two. We're teaching false doctrine, we're going to eliminate it immediately. That doesn't happen either. Sometimes false doctrine is hard to identify, and you have to sit there and examine, and you got to study, and people have to have time to think and reason it out. I can't just get up there and tell you the thing that you were taught 45 years ago, I wasn't even alive, the thing you were taught 45 years ago is not true, and you're all not going to be like, oh, okay, Daniel, thank you very much. And everything's automatically, that's not the way it is. And honestly, and I don't have that kind of power, but you understand what I'm saying here, the point I'm trying to make. It's not just a overnight thing. It's, hey, we've got to examine the scriptures. We've got to take time to carefully make sure that we're doing the best that we can. I think, yes, go ahead before I... Yes. But their heart is not there? Yeah, I think so. But we can lead a quiet and peaceable life. Yeah. That may mean that we're not doing what we need to do. Yes. We're not confronting it. It's just more, Well, then you're not even a Christian at that point, really. Whether you come to church or not. And we're actually going to, that comes into... I don't know if we're going to get to it today, but we're going to be talking about emperor worship because that's really one of the main focal points of Revelation is there's a very real temptation. All you had to do to emperor worship, just to get, I'll jump ahead a little bit, emperor worship, pretty much the only thing you had to do, take a pinch of incense, say Caesar is Lord, throw it in the fireplace, and you got your mark and you moved on. Historically, that's what we're told by these early Christian sources. I can say Caesar is Lord without saying he's as good as God. I can say that he's a Lord without meaning it, or I could just do it and go through the motions, or am I compromising my faith here? And so that's the question that they're all going to have to face. That's what the good thing about persecution is it forces you, God uses persecution to sift the good and the bad, to separate the sheep from the goats. He uses persecution to eliminate those in the church that are not truly part of the church, which is why I think a great period of persecution is coming, because the church in the United States, if we just look at the whole thing, not just the Church of Christ, but the whole thing, the church in the United States is full of chaff, full of goats. And so I think there's coming a time very quickly where there's going to be intense persecution, and God is going to sift that out. He's already doing it, but if he says more, then I think he knows what's best, and he says it's time for more. CW? I just want to say this, that, back then they had a problem with false doctrine. Yeah. We certainly don't have that problem today, do we? Nope. So really, when it comes right down to this, you've got these issues that they're both addressing. They're addressing this lukewarmness, and they're addressing these false doctrine. But the way that Paul and John are addressing the same congregation sounds like different stages of that, right? It doesn't sound like the same time period. And so for them to have been written within 3 to 5 years of each other, I don't think that really makes sense. But I'm willing to admit that that's a little bit subjective. In some extreme cases, some of this stuff can happen quickly, but generally not so much. It's a gradual thing. The enemy doesn't just punch down the door and start beating us. The enemy infiltrates. He's not the father of attacking and beating us. He is the father of what? Lies. The little lies, the little steps that he takes that push us just a little bit farther, a little bit farther, a little bit farther. That's what he wants to do. Dale? Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's hard to say, because we have to admit as Christians that the only person who knows the heart of people is Jesus. And by all accounts and purposes, we can be appearing to be great Christians, and under behind closed doors or under the surface, we can be hiding a whole lot of things, and people are really good at hiding things. And so you have these preachers that are like, oh, they're great preachers, whatever, and then all of a sudden something comes out about them and you realize, what? Yeah. Yeah, I would like to hope that you all understand I'm human and not perfect, but, Yeah, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven. Yeah, there's a lot of people that think that Jesus is a good person, but they're still not going to go to heaven, so. Yes. Yeah. 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 Yeah, we need to be very careful with the way that we. Now, CW is a little too crazy with catching the visitors. Not really. Him and Marvin are like sprinting after him, trying to catch up with him and say hi. But we need to be really careful with how we make sure to talk to our visitors. When Elizabeth and I got married, and immediately after we got married, we moved over so that I could go to school, finish up my schooling at Freed-Hardeman. And we were there in the summer, and in a college town, you know this, you understand, the population decreases and nothing happens. It's just, nothing happens in the summer as much. And so we would go to these churches and we would actually play a game. We would try to get in and out without talking to anybody. Now, us. We are not the most socially outgoing people, but we work at it. It's not something, CW, it comes naturally to CW. It does not come naturally to me. It does not come naturally to Elizabeth, but we try. And we don't do a good job sometimes, and we try. But we tried to avoid. We tried to avoid and stay away. And the congregation that we ended up staying with, Finger Church of Christ, Finger, but there they say Fanger, that was the congregation that we couldn't get away. We tried to get away, and we couldn't get away. Our friends Chris and Kelsey were like, they became our friends, but they were like, will you come and be a part of our congregation? Will you come help us with VBS? Will you come do this? Will you come do that? Blah, 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 blah. It's just like, we couldn't get away. We even if we tried, even if we wanted to go to somewhere else, they wouldn't have let us. And that was, to some degree, I mean, that was what made our choice for us. You know, and some of the churches that we had recommended to us, oh, these are great congregations. Those were the ones that we were able to sneak in and out of undetected very easily. So I agree with what you're saying on that. All right, where are we at? So I think that this again points to, we got a later date on Revelation, not during Nero's time, but later on Revelation. Here's the fun one. Y'all ready to get into some text? Revelation chapter 17. I had to split it up over 2 slides. It might just be easier for you to open it up in your Bible. And we're going to start, this is going to be fun, because we're going to start in the middle of the book, and we probably shouldn't, but we're going to have to, because this speaks a lot to the date of the book. And this is another verse where, when I read this verse, I cannot help but think about all the things in Daniel that we've talked about, and that's why I wanted to start us off with Daniel. This verse appears to have some sort of succession of kings. And we're not going to talk about every detail of this verse. We're going to get to this verse later again. But I just want to go ahead. I didn't want to cut out the context. I wanted to read the context. Revelation chapter 17, starting at verse 1. Then one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and said to me, "Come, I will show you the judgment of the great prostitute who is seated on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed sexual immorality, and with the wine of whose sexual immorality the dwellers on earth have become drunk." So he carried me away in the spirit to a wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was full of blasphemous names, and it had 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold and jewels and pearls, holding in her hand a golden cup full of abominations and the impurities of her sexual immorality. On her forehead was written a name of mystery, Babylon the Great, mother of prostitutes and of earth's abominations. And I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints and the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And when I saw her, I marveled greatly. All right, sorry. There we go. But the angel said to me, "Why do you marvel? I will tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast with the 7 heads and 10 horns that carries her. The beast that you saw was and is not and is about to rise from the bottomless pit and go to destruction. And the dwellers on earth whose names have not been written in the book of life from the foundation of the world will marvel to see the beast, because it was and is not and is to come. This calls for a mind with wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman is seated. They are also 7 kings, 5 of whom have fallen. One is, and the other has not yet come. And when he does come, he must remain only a little while. As for the beast that was and is not, it is an 8th, but belongs to the 7, and it goes to destruction. And the 10 horns that you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received royal power, but they are to receive authority as kings for 1 hour together with the beast. These are of one mind, and they hand over their power and authority to the beast. They will make war on the Lamb, and the Lamb will conquer them, for he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and those with him are called and chosen and faithful. A lot I want to say about this passage, and then the bell already rang, and we hadn't even got started on it. Number 1, Revelation 17:14 is my favorite verse of the entire book. I feel like it is one of the key verses of the book. We don't have time to get into that right now. But I can and will at some point preach a whole lesson, a whole sermon about just that verse, because that verse is the most important in Revelation. The succession of kings that is mentioned there is very reminiscent of what we've already seen in Daniel, right? When we got to Daniel chapter 7, there were 4 beasts, and we don't have to go through all of them to get the point. What were each of the beasts representing? Do you remember? A kingdom. Each one represented a different kingdom. Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome. Now, every time in Daniel they talk about horns, it's specific kings of the kingdoms. When you look at a big horn ram, a picture of a bighorn ram or some other majestic animal, what is one of the first things you notice? The horns. And so even though it is not the kingdom, it is one of the figureheads, it is the leader of the kingdom. It sits upon the head like a crown sits upon the head of a ruler. So pretty much if you look at Daniel 7, 8, and so on, every time in those visions, the beast is going to represent a kingdom and the horns are going to represent specific kings of the kingdom. So, in this passage, 8 kings are mentioned in verse 9 through 11, and the one that appears to have been reigning was number 6. So the questions we got to ask are the kings past, present, or future? Is the count to begin with Julius Caesar, Augustus, or Caligula? Should the comparatively insignificant rulers who were only in power for a brief time be counted or not? And should the numbers be interpreted literally or symbolically? And I'll say this, you can make the case that all of these numbers should just be symbolic. Because throughout the book, numbers are symbolic. Revelation is full of symbolic numbers. And so you can very much make the case here, and I don't have any sort of definitive gut punch to tell you it's not symbolic. But if you look at the count and the succession of kings, a lot of time, here's a few different ways that people, and we'll come back to this, I'm just summarizing before next week. There is a way to make this represent kingdoms that fits with what we have in history. There is a very easy way, I believe, to make this fit the emperors, and there is lessons to be learned with the symbolic as well. So we're going to just look at this from the comparison of the emperors, and what I believe is going on here is I believe that this is written during the time of Domitian's father, Vespasian. We'll have to save that story for next week. In between Vespasian and Domitian, his older brother Titus ruled, but he only ruled for a very short period of time. And so if you count it in the way that I think it should be counted, Vespasian would be number 6, Titus would be number 7, and Domitian was number 8. And if you look at the